I'm a senior AI engineer at a top Y Combinator startup, and I've interviewed probably around 20 AI engineers at this point, both to become colleagues at my company and also some mock interviews with my subscribers, some of which I've actually helped them land their dream jobs. There's a very clear pattern between the people I end up not hiring and the people I do hire. And in this video, I'm going to show you the things I'm looking for when hiring AI engineers, so you'll know how to present yourself in the highest possible light in your interviews and secure that role. So the first thing by far I see lacking in the people I interview is confidence. Confidence affects all the other points I'm about to address, and it's really probably the biggest make or break in the interview. Look, I'm not asking you to be a Giga Chad who never doubts himself or something like that. That's not the confidence I'm looking for. Here's the thing. In software development, in a lot of things in life, there are always more than one solution, right? And in an interview, a lot of the times you're presented with coming up with a solution and present why you came up with that solution and why it's good for this project. And what I see is a lot of people are just not very confident when they present the solution. Like, I want to see, why did you come up with this? Like, what research did you do on the code base or whatever to decide that this was the best solution? And stand by it. Like, yeah, this, given the information I have from this interview, given the little things I've gone to know, this is the best solution I come up with. And also, if you can, address the other solutions as well. If you come up with anything else, and you might be like, oh, I think this is another way to do it. But I think given the industry that this business is operating in, given we're in the financial sector and security and compliance is very important, then I'd say my solution, which might be a bit slower and inefficient, but favors compliance, I'd say that's better here. That's a great answer. Make sure you know about the business that the company is operating in, and that you think beyond like what's the sexiest code you can write. And here's the thing. I'm a senior AI engineer. I'm wrong a lot of times in my job. Also, I worked in a lot of startups, and when developing a product, especially in a startup, you can't always be right, but it's very useful to be opinionated about something. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're developing a product at a startup. Sometimes you won't really know the best way to build something for a customer. You're not really sure what user journey to map out in the UX. So you might leave it open-ended. Maybe there's multiple different ways of doing something. And then you kind of let the customer figure things out. But the customer is lazy and they might get lost by having too much analysis paralysis or whatever, and your product fails. Instead, if you think about how the customer would go through this is your theory, right? You would map out a certain flow of doing something that's very opinionated, very strict, but easy to follow. There's two cases here. Case A is it's the wrong flow. It's not the way your customer wants to work in the product. And then it will break very quickly. And you much more easily and quickly be able to get the feedback from the customer that this is probably not the best way, because it will kind of be painful for the customer to use this, which can be a good thing because it will be easier to source this feedback. And then you'll be able to figure out, okay, what are the ways you would like to work here? Whereas if you keep it open-ended, it can be kind of hard for the customer to be like, yeah, I don't know. I kind of just don't, yeah, it's all right, I guess. If you're unopinionated, it's hard to give you feedback about your opinion, basically. And generally what we see in startups is they tend to do well when they start being very opinionated, and then they fail, and then they reiterate. And the same thing goes in an interview. But when you're presenting a solution, try not to focus so much on whether your solution is right or wrong, because at the end of the day, this is the solution you came up with. So stand by it, If there was a better solution, you would have come up with it. But the best solution is the one that you have, So stand by it. And then maybe me as an interviewer, I'll give you some more context, or I'll debunk your theory and say, no, I don't think this is right because X, Y, Z. You can respond to that, be like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And maybe you can build on top of that answer. So anyway, just try to be a bit more relaxed and confident. And you might be asking, okay, well, how do I become more confident? It's a bit difficult to say, but mainly, the more interviews you do, generally you'll become more confident and comfortable. I'd say taking social risks is a good way of increasing confidence. This can be in an interview where you do something risky. Like, for example, have an opinion about something and stand by it and be like, no, this is the way. That's a good way of becoming more confident. You're just trying more risks. Also, just in general in real life, like going out talking to strangers will make you a much more confident person because you'll get way better social skills, and then a scenario like an interview is way less likely to throw you off balance. But that's a whole other video in itself, really. Anyway, these are of course things I've learned as someone hiring AI engineers, and also someone who has been in the hiring market and trying to get a job. So if these insights are interesting so far, I also have a newsletter where I can just write like a journal of the things I'm learning every week as an AI engineer. It's not LLM written at all. It's just me writing my thoughts down on a scratch pad. Oh, I learned this. This is useful. I like this video, blah, blah, blah. So that's interesting. You can sign up for that in the description. Another thing I see lacking, and this is mainly specific to like AI engineers, the Gen AI part, is Python skills. Now, a lot of the people, pretty much all the people I interview, they can code with Python, but when you really dig deep, I want to see what's beneath the surface, and a lot of times it's not really there. I've seen in coding interviews people that have been coding in Python for years, but then they choke up, and I guess this ties into confidence as well. They choke up when they have to like sort a list in Python without building another function for it. They're not aware that you can use sorted, stuff like Lambda functions. It's probably stuff you might have used once or twice before, but you're just not very comfortable with it, which makes it hard for me as an interviewer to really gauge your Python skills. So just brushing up with like the real Pythonic stuff. You'd be surprised at how many people I ask about how concurrency works in Python or the global interpreter lock. And a lot of them have barely even heard of the global interpreter lock, which is the most fundamental feature in Python. Also asynchronous programming, like being able to explain that fully. That's very important, and a lot of people miss that. So if you'd like to brush up on your Python skills, I actually made a video where I go through 50 advanced Python skills that I collected when I was interviewing and through my experience as a software developer. Concepts that really helped me shine in interviews, as I was able to explain them quite clearly. It's gotten a lot of feedback, this video, and it helped a lot of people, so I highly recommend you give that a watch as well. All right, there's two more things left here. The first one is, of course, architecture. I'll usually give a system design interview where I'll give a certain problem and ask them to map it out architectural wise, and see what sort of components they would use here. And a lot of times what I'll ask is like, how would you handle receiving a bunch of events per second, like hundreds or thousands of events per second? If you just send it directly to your backend API, imagine if you end up getting 1 million requests per second or events per second. Then you'd have to scale up the whole backend just for this one endpoint. It makes no sense. And that's why I'm looking at stuff like message queues, maybe a ClickHouse database, or another service that can kind of take all these events, and then we can feed that to the backend in a more like normalized manner so as not to overload our backend. Stuff like that. I'm also looking for knowledge of serverless execution using something like Cloudflare Workers or Ingest, which is basically a huge async task queue where with built-in retries, etc. And it's very good for data processing, checkpointing, things like that. And that's been a staple at every AI startup I've ever worked at. So I'm really looking for knowledge and hopefully experience of using these. So like I mentioned before, I sometimes do coaching calls with my subscribers where I do mock interviews and we review their performance better and see how they can improve. And one of the mentees I had, which actually helped her get her dream job at a top bank here in Europe, she mentioned this book called AI Engineering by Chip Huyen, which I think goes through a lot of the things I've talked about in this video, at least on the technological side of things. So I'm personally too lazy to read it, but maybe it's a good resource. She found it was a good resource, so maybe check that out. And also if you're interested in working together with me on a coaching call, maybe you have a big interview lined coming up and you really like to nail it, feel free to book a call with the link in the description with me, and I'd be more than happy to help you out. Finally, exception handling and performance evaluation. So, in GenAI, we're hitting a lot of different APIs. So how can we build systems that can handle unforeseen exceptions? I think here it's good to mention stuff like exponential backoff. Like you hit the Azure OpenAI API and maybe it's overloaded, and then you wait a little bit, and then you wait even longer and even longer, and eventually hopefully goes through. Also, just in general, making sure exceptions don't like fail the entire agent. If you have an exception, the agent should return a human message saying like, "Oh, please try again." Things like that, very important. And to this end, performance evaluation. If you use something like Langsmith, that's great, because that really shows me that you've taken some time to like really try to evaluate and understand your agents. Also, having experience or knowledge of setting up evals and knowing when to use evals. I find a lot of the people I coach, they're not really aware of when to use evals and the importance of doing so. Imagine if you have to switch from using Anthropic's Claude models to the latest GPT model, which is something we did at work recently. Having evals set in place is kind of like test cases. So you test them against Claude, make sure they have a certain score, and then once you switch to GPT, you can run the same test cases and see if there's any regressions. And if so, you can fix them accordingly, or you can be confident in seeing that your model switch didn't really break anything, which saves so much time. So I highly recommend reading up on this. And you might be like, wow, this is a lot of stuff. And like, I've never been an AI engineer before. How am I supposed to learn it? And the truth is, like, dude, you got Gemini, you got Claude, you got all this stuff. There's no excuse not to learn these things. And you can still make projects with this. Like, it's never been easier to learn this stuff. So that's not really an excuse. Even if you haven't worked with, let's say, Cloudflare workers before, but you know that's a good solution in the system design interview, bring it up. But tell the interviewer, hey, like, I never used this, but I think based on what I read, my research, I think this would be good because X, Y, Z. Then you set the expectation, but you also say that you're not afraid to be opinionated. And also it tells me that you keep up with the industry, you read stuff. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. In case you enjoyed hearing more from like the interviewer perspective of things, I also made this video where I have some of my top AI engineer interview questions that I like to ask in interviews. So yeah, feel free to check that out. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you later.